Welcome to the Learning Can't Wait podcast, a Full Mind production. At Full Mind, our vision is to ensure every child has access to an exceptional education. Each episode, we will be joined by pathfinders within and around the education space who are bringing about transformational change on behalf of deserving students. I am your host, Hayley Spira-Bauer. Welcome back, everybody, to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. I have an extra big smile on my face today as I'm starting recording because our next guest is Dr. Deborah Kenny, the CEO and founder of Harlem Village Academies. If you know my resume well, as I'm sure you all do, then you know Deborah is my former employer, boss, not a word she likes, but someone that I know very well and spent many years with over in Harlem. So welcome, Deborah. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you, colleague, I would say.
Okay, colleague.
And fellow educator. Oh my
Forever
gosh, so
educator.
excited to be with you.
All right, so a lot has happened since we last talked, including one of the topics we're going to talk about today, which is your new best-selling book, The Well-Educated Child. Congratulations.
Thank you.
But we'll dive into all of that. So I'll start off by asking my first question, which is, how did you come to be the personal and professional version of yourself?
Oh gosh, well, that's interesting. Um, how do I say that in a concise way? I,
Have to be concise if you don't want to be.
well, I think, I guess the best way to talk about how did I become who I am is I would start with my parents. I lost both my parents this past year. And so I've been in a very deeply reflective and retrospectively grateful mindset lately about who they were and what they instilled in me. And, my father was a real hard worker who instilled a sense of service and in the Jewish ethical tradition of using your life in service of the greater good. And my mother was a deeply kind, caring person, and she was intellectually curious and uh, an avid reader. And I look back and say, well, that's where, that's where it all began.
Those are qualities that just from knowing you personally, I know you still hold very, very true. Would you say that you've added other ethos or belief system since that early desire to have your own kids and the students that are your kids at HVA become deeply curious and avid readers? Are there other things that you consider very important still in your philosophy?
Yeah, I had a chance in writing this book, which took 8 years to write The Well-Educated Child. I wanted to be forced to articulate what it is we learned so that I could share it with everyone else. And, there are hundreds of strategies and practices that go into running a great school, as you know, because you were part of it. But if I were to distill it down, what I write about in the book is these three essential ideas of quality thinking, student agency, and ethical purpose.
When you look across the country at what's actually happening right now in classrooms, why do you think these three principles are at risk or being elevated to the degree that they deserve?
It's interesting you ask about what's happening across the country because just last week there was a New York Times article about a report that just came out talking about a 10-year generational decline in reading and math scores across the country that broke all boundaries, geographic, economic, that it's across the board, that it was not related only to COVID. And
Right.
so, Morning Joe asked me to come on for insights and analysis. And I started talking about some of the things we've done for so many years. And what's funny is I was thinking about you when I was talking about this on the show because, I talked about the article comments on the fact that the decline, dramatic drop in student achievement, is coincides in terms of timing with the advent of technology, both in schools and in kids on kids' screens, and that they posit that perhaps that and a lack of accountability in at all levels of government, that they pointed to those two factors, and certainly those are factors, especially the technology. But then I thought about, you know, all the things that we do and how other schools could learn from what we do. And I was talking about the Friday meetings we used to have. Remember, it was you,
Community
me, and like,
circle.
yeah, and when it was like a group of teachers who volunteered on Friday to get together in my office and talk about how do we improve on students' passion for reading to be avid readers, and that the idea that you can tap into the wisdom of teachers and really respect and elevate teaching by giving by having a culture in which teachers are listened to and their ideas are implemented across a school, right? So we would sit around and say, what more can we do? What are the problems? What are the challenges? Let's brainstorm solutions. And you were in those weekly meetings. They were voluntary for whoever wanted to be part of this. And we ended up with a school where kids are reading 50 books a year because they want to read, not because of a prize or a punishment or a score or a grade, but because they wanted to read. That is such an extraordinary accomplishment. And I'm proud of you. I remember how the kids in your classroom were lit up. They like you got them so excited about reading. And this is actually quite serious because only through a high volume of high quality reading will kids become well educated. There's no workaround, there's no shortcut. And so yeah, that's been a very important part of it. It's one of many many different strategies you need to run a school, but it's foundational.
It is an absolutely vital part of what I've taken into parenting as well, Deborah. So, first of all, I talk about this experience at HVA being charged with helping kids to fall in love with reading as incredibly formative for my career. I remember when Dr. Sam Fragomeni interviewed me, the building was closed. I was looking for a role outside of the public school I had just been in the South Bronx. And he said, your job is to get kids to fall in love with reading. And I thought,
That is
cool job.
exactly right.
What a
Yes.
cool job. And to this day, I credit that experience with being instrumental in how I look at what I want education to look like for the kids that I have in my own home, but the kids that I serve across the country with my work.
Yeah.
Because,
I love that
yeah.
story. I love that story. So I guess that was our third or fourth year because that was our second school. And he was absolutely wonderful. Um, in our very first week and our very first year, it's funny that you say you connect it to your children because that is what I did with my own children. I did not allow them to watch TV until fifth grade, and then it was only one show a week. And so they had a lot of time on their hands and they read one, two, or three books a week for pleasure. And I thought, well, all kids can do this.
Mhm.
Brought it into the school and said to the teachers in year one, two, and then I guess when you joined, it was year three or four. Um, our goal is not 50 books a year. The goal is that the kids are avid readers. That's the goal. Now, you come up with great ideas for how we're going to make that happen as teachers. And our faculty guide to this day is filled with dozens of ideas that year after year after year teachers conceived of, implemented, tested, refined, and that's the foundation. Now, of course, you still need instruction in phonics, and, of course, there are other things you're doing, but this is the foundation of everything.
Yeah, it falls into place when it relies on the idea of motivation, right? And there's a big talk
Right,
about the disengagement crisis in the United States today, about how students are, in part because of technology, in part because of a variety of external factors that are putting pressure on them, either in or out of school, less connected to the world than they ever have been before.
right, right,
But when
right,
you get kids curious, you have them feel passion,
right,
you feel
right.
internally and intrinsically motivated, which I know is another principle that you hold
Yes,
very dear, then the
right.
rest falls into place more easily. You're not fighting an uphill battle.
Right. You spoke earlier about like what has evolved in the last 10
Yeah,
years at
tell
our
me everything.
schools.
What's different?
Everything. Well, first of all, um, I I finally was able to articulate the vision that was kind of ephemeral in the beginning and come up with systems. And what ultimately happened is that I tapped into the wisdom that already existed. I found the brightest education minds in the country and brought them all together because um, called the highest performing school, the number one, 100% proficient. But I wasn't satisfied with that because I felt that, well, how are you defining high performing? What do you mean by achievement? And it always seemed to simply mean how the kids performed on tests and that they were well behaved, and that's it. And I felt that was a very low bar. And so it's like that Bob Dylan song, Idiot Wind, where his lyrics says, you find out when you reach the top that you're really at the bottom. And that's how I felt, after years of being celebrated and honored as the best schools. I was actually dissatisfied. And I felt, there's something more it's not just this excellent behavior and these, great test scores. There's something more. The kids deserve what the kids in Chappaqua and Scarsdale get, or the kids in the best private schools. And so one example of that is that instead of just excellent, respectful behavior, which is obviously important and critical, that we want kids to have agency, which is to say, to take initiative and be driven and be able to stick with something, have an attention span for hours and follow through and be resourceful and, to be self-directed, right? And another example is instead of us motivating children, we want to create the conditions in which they are self motivated. So remember those behavior lessons we used to do? You were a very big part of it. We'd have 15 lessons over 3 days. And
Mhm.
it was great on the one hand because it established a beautiful spirit and it established this incredibly high bar for behavior. And we did it with warmth, right? But it was still us doing all the motivating. We would come up with funny skits and we would have, ways to tell the kids exactly what we wanted of them. But it was still us doing all the work, us motivating them. So what's transpired in the last 10 years is elevating this to them being self motivated and self directed and more independent. And we really struggled to achieve that. Saying you want that is one thing, but making it happen is very difficult. And I will say we stumbled. It was not a direct path. It was a start and stop and a lot of setbacks, and I made a lot of mistakes. I talk in the Well Educated Child, I talk about the mistakes I made along the way. And then I explain how these ideas can be applied in any school. And John Legend, who wrote the foreword to the book, said that when he read it, he has 4 kids, that his mind was racing with ideas for how he could apply these ideas at home with his own 4 kids. I want teachers and leaders across the country to have access to the last half century of wisdom that I spent 25 years deeply studying and implementing and refining, so that other schools don't have to struggle as much as we did to understand what truly excellent teaching and learning looks like, and to receive the wisdom of the ages, which I have a lot of information in the well-educated child about the most brilliant thinkers of the last half century, and so that we can implement their ideas rather than struggling and then taking a decade to figure it out like we did. I want it to be easier for other schools so that they can be successful more quickly, and then build on that.
Yeah, the way you're describing it sounds like, and I still haven't read the book in full disclosure, but I will. I will as soon as I can get my hands on it. Now I know I can. It sounds like a synthesis of the experience and the study and what you've come to understand to be absolute non-negotiables in operating a high-performing system that not only has student achievement at the forefront, but also is cultivating these lifelong characteristics of, supportive members of society, empathetic individuals, self-motivated, intrinsically motivated, passionate youth, which, you can't put a price on that. That is incredibly valuable for students overcoming obstacles and the challenges that they don't know or we don't even know that exist yet. When you think about, Deborah, right now there's this dialogue in education about AI and the jobs that don't exist yet that our kids, your graduates, will be stepping into in a matter of years. It is not the skills they learn in high school and college that prepare them for that. It's the qualities of human character that allow them to adapt and embrace those changes and challenges in the future, which is why I think marrying both the academic and the characteristic qualities so closely is vital.
Yeah, and we could add to that this idea that Ted Sizer put forward, and he was the most influential educator in the country in the 20th century, um, of students becoming informed skeptics, because the future, and one could argue it started already, is filled with a barrage of misinformation and garbage that is continually being thrown at our kids 24/7. How will they be equipped to discern and truly know the difference between bogus information and valid information? How can we ensure that they will not be duped,
Mm.
by, um, any one of the many, anti-American or just anti-liberal, small L liberal, ideas that we have to guard against. And so I would argue that a classical grounding in the great ideas, the great books, the great thinkers of the world, diverse thinkers, diverse ideas, diverse books, that a strong grounding in that is the only way that children will be inoculated against the, um, overwhelming amount of, vapid at best and, uh, ill-intentioned, misinformation that comes at them constantly. That's a big challenge going forward.
Yeah, I am myself really wide-eyed about this topic. I think that it starts young. So could you talk a little bit about the Montessori pre-K? Because I do believe Montessori principles and practices have always been close to my heart. I do believe that a lot of what underlies Montessori type education is what you're talking about in a more advanced form as as children get older. How did you come to land on Montessori, and how has it looked in practice?
Yeah, I think you're really right. When I started thinking about how to close the gap between the vision that was the founding vision of HVA, the vision that all of us as the educators who started the schools um, shared, and the actualization of that vision. It's so much easier said than done when you have ambitious aspirations for kids, right? You want them to take ownership of their learning and to be independent and to be able to concentrate for long periods of time on complex tasks and to be incredibly rigorous thinkers and to be self-directed. You want all these things. Okay, but how do you do it? What's the curriculum, right? And there were two options in front of me: design something on our own, or look out into the world and see what exists, select something, and then either adopt it or adapt it, right? And I chose the latter because I wanted something time honored, time tested, with a built-in infrastructure. So I chose Montessori and the International Baccalaureate because they aligned with our vision. Now, actually, the first thing we did, and it was beginning around the time that you were with us, is we decided that um, we wanted to articulate our own end goals. So we created something called a graduate profile that described, and I'm happy to send it to you to share with your viewers, your audience, um, and listeners. It describes exactly what we want for kids by the time they complete a K to 12 education. So it took the vision and it turned it into a set of very concrete goals. And it was Grant Wiggins, the late great Grant Wiggins, who worked with us for a number of years, who, championed this idea. And so we had the vision since day one. Then we had this graduate profile. And then looking around and saying, well, what curricula, what frameworks exist that match our vision and our objectives that we've articulated in our graduate profile? And it looked to me that Montessori for the little ones and the International Baccalaureate for the older kids both aligned with our vision and our goals. And ergo, they aligned with each other, right? And so that's how we came to that decision.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about the pre-K through 12 spectrum that you're serving now with all of the schools as one cohesive kind of beginning and end. You've obviously led me now through the past 10 years. Let's look forward into the next 10 years. What do you hope that your current graduating class, what do you hope that they think about in 10 years when they look back on their education at HVA?
Uh, you know, it's sort of tied to, in the first chapter of the book, I described the education I had in my summer camp and how I was bored in school for the most part, typical American public high school. I was pretty bored, a lot of memorizing. But my summer camp was this, I, in the well-educated child, I describe in detail this ideal education that was so rigorous and so inspirational um, that I actually described it as utopia. and and so I would love for our kids, to answer your question, to look back in that same transformational way and say, this school made me who I am in the three ways that I describe in the second part of the book, with a chapter on each of the three big ideas. Quality thinking, I would want kids to say, I came away with the ability to analyze, to think independently, deeply knowledgeable, intellectually curious. Um, Second, agency. I came away as a self-directed person who I care about the quality of my work. I'm driven, I'm passionate, I'm resourceful, I followed through. I'm persistent. I have agency. And thirdly, and I think ultimately most important for each individual young soul and for society is ethical purpose. That I came away from school understanding that we each have a calling. I was put on this earth for a reason, and I need to discern my calling. That might not happen, probably won't happen by the end of 12th grade or even by the end of college, but at some point in my life, whether it's in my 20s or 30s, that I discern my own personal mission in life and my purpose. And therefore, I'm living a fulfilled life because I am living out my purpose and in so doing, contributing to society in a profound way.
Do you have in your head what it looks like for kids walking across a stage, what they are like thinking and feeling in the moment for their like next phase of life? So I kind of jumped you ahead to 10 years from now, but what do you hope a truly well-educated child like thinks and feels as they walk across that stage?
I would hope that they think and feel the the idea that Viktor Frankl conveyed in the book Man's Search for Meaning, that life is not about it's not about what life has to offer you, but what is life asking of you? In other words, what am I here to give? What am I here to contribute? How will I use my life in service of the greater good? I would hope that they would be thinking about, I mean, excited for the fun of college. 100% of our kids are accepted to and enroll in four-year colleges. Of course, excited for learning, excited for the fun, and the friends that they'll make, and ultimately excited for how they will use their lives for a higher purpose.
You stayed consistent there from the 10 years forward to the right now. I mean, you kept that path really clear. As like the final wrap up of this conversation, I want to focus a little bit about on your kind of advice to give or wisdom to share, which you've done in the book, but you're also doing here right now with other leaders. And on my ending question, we'll ask you what advice you have to give other leaders. But from a standpoint of also giving as you build, I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about Deeper Learning Institute. It has a new name since I've been there.
Oh, yeah.
I was there when it was born, when you were helping to get teachers credentialed to be able to be in the classroom, and I believe now leaders as well. Is that accurate?
Um, it's teachers who become leaders. Uh, the, I mean, it's been for most of the last 10 years, an important part of what we do. And the reason we founded the Deeper Learning Institute, and thank you for asking about that, is because we noticed about a decade ago, it was really maybe 13 years ago, that teachers were doing things in the classroom that we hadn't suggested, that they got from somewhere, and we weren't sure where it was coming from, but it ultimately seemed to be coming from some training they got. Young, bright, well-meaning uh, young people who were snapping and clapping and using PowerPoints and chants and mnemonic memory devices and songs, thinking this is great teaching,
Mhm.
but it's not great teaching. And what I write about in the book is it's the pedagogy of poverty. And yet, this is what they thought great teaching was. And especially, they thought this is what urban kids need. But it was incredibly low level. And we realized we're going to have to develop our own teachers and give our own credentialing um, and do our own teacher preparation. So that's why we started the Deeper Learning Institute, so that the vision that we have, which is again aligned with Montessori IB, and it's the vision that we've had all along, but we finally did all the hard work to put concrete systems in place in a consistent way. And that includes, and we have a fabulous new director, Christine Walkowitz, and she runs it. And we have this brownstone in Harlem where the Deeper Learning Institute takes place, and it's very important because understanding that there is there is a, a century and more of wisdom about what great teaching is. And you should be able to discern between the clapping and the chanting and the shallow kind of little tricks versus really cognitively demanding, intriguing questions that have students grappling with ideas and the kinds of assessment that have students applying knowledge, not just memorizing and repeating. These are some of the core ideas behind deeper learning that we teach our teachers so that they can teach the kids.
Yeah, I wrote about this in my newsletter last week that rigor is empathy, and anything less than is actually a lack of caring for our children and the potential that they have. So I very deeply resonate with this idea that teachers sometimes are doing their very best because of what they've been taught or what they've observed. And yet, that is not good enough for our children who are furthest from educational justice, especially. And it is not what they deserve. And I really appreciate the like-mindedness here on this topic because it feels like people are they think they're doing the right thing
Of
by
course. Yeah.
lowering standards or getting kids engaged through, like you say, shallow kind of practices. It's what they see in media. It's what they may have been taught elsewhere. And yet our research is pretty clear that we have to keep the bar exceedingly high and keep that demand level high.
Yeah. You were also asking what I recommend to other leaders.
Yeah, that's my
There are a
final
couple.
question. You please
Yeah,
take it away.
oh, I didn't want to sidestep that. I just got carried away.
No, it's okay.
First of
As we
all,
should.
the culturally responsive teaching in the brain, that book by Zaretta Hammond and her new book as well, is I'm obsessed with. It's such an important resource. And the book Verified by Sam Weinberg, in relation to AI and technology. I mean, if someone wanted this summer to really improve their school, in addition to The Well-Educated Child, I would recommend those two books and those two incredible thinkers to move your schools forward.
I love it. Deborah, thank you so much for coming on and waxing not just poetic, but getting from pedagogy to practice and also helping me relive some really, really great memories. It has been a pleasure having you on the Learning Can't Wait podcast.
Oh, I was so excited about it. I still have memories of your kids absolutely lit up in the classroom. So this was wonderful. Thank you.
And I speak to many of those kids still today. I know one of them is actually working at HVA, Shaq. Hey,
Oh
Shaq,
my
shout out to
gosh.
you.
Yes.
And so it is really fun for me to think back to what had provided largely the widest influence on my career and also how I parent today. So thank you for being a large part of that story.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And thank you to everybody for tuning in today. Thanks for listening to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and share this episode. Be the first to know when we have a new episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have a suggestion for an episode, email us at podcast@fullmindlearning.com.